We've all heard that a government is going to spend big on a new project, but could this be a bad thing? What if you didn't have to pay as much? Your money was left alone and you decided what you wanted to spend it on. Governments set rules in place so the public and businesses spend the way they want. But is that good? You'll be closer to answering these questions if you get to the end of this video. Let's talk taxes. So, the main role of a government is to uphold laws, stabilise the national currency, and protect their citizens. But it is common for government to provide many services. However, none of this stuff comes free. Where does the money come from to pay for police, defence force, public fresh water lines, and public roads? They are, of course, funded by life's guarantees, taxes. Think of taxes as a portion of the money workers and businesses give to the government to spend on things that the government thinks society needs. The government is not a business. Even though they are the ones spending the money, they do not produce that money themselves. The money needs to be provided by taxpayers. This is why a government needs its people to survive. Now, I know what you guys could be thinking. Kitten, since the government needs us to survive, we don't need the government. All they do is take. We would have more for ourselves if there was no government. There's an important thing to remember. Governments uphold law and try to keep their citizens safe from threats, which could come from both within and outside their country. Without government, there would be chaos, but a government needs us to function. With a government that is dedicated to serve the best interest of its citizens and not itself, it can help society live nicely. The citizens of that country are generally happy because they can live their life feeling free and safe where they live. But why don't we just let governments do everything for us? We can give them all our income through taxes, then they will have more money to do what's good. Well, there are a couple of reasons. No one is perfect, so how could a small group of imperfect people make decisions that are right for a whole population? Consider this. Now, we all have someone in our lives we are closer to compared to others. For whatever reason, we get each other, and they are great company, a best friend. Now, you listening, you think of that someone, whoever they may be, in your life. You guys meet up at the local mall, and you are at the food court for lunch with all these different options. Could you with confidence order exactly what they want to eat? What about every single time? Who knows, maybe you could. But don't feel bad if you feel like you couldn't know exactly what they wanted all the time. Because people are very complex and each person has their own unique view of the world with unique wants and desires compared with anyone else. Now, going back to the food court example at the mall, this is going to be an extreme example, but imagine now instead of deciding what your friend was going to eat, you had to decide what everyone in that food court was going to eat by pooling their money to use to buy their food for them. How would you be able to decide? You could hear everyone's view. Maybe cast a vote to see how many people would want to eat at the different options to help you make your decision. You could have the view that people need to eat healthy, or that you know one of the owners of one of the stores, in your opinion, is a bad person, so the people in the food court won't eat there. Maybe one shop has too many plastic bags or plastic cutlery that is harmful to the environment. Not easy, is it? Now you've made your decision. How do the people feel about your decision? Yeah, we can pretty much guarantee that some people are not going to be happy with all the food that they got. There will of course be some people who are happy with your decision, but there is no way of pleasing everyone. This is the real challenge that governments have every day. How is someone you don't know supposed to know what you want and need in your life? Only you know that, and maybe those close to you. So this brings me to the next reason of why a government who controls all decisions in a country will likely not work as well as what a private business owner can. It's motivation, and to be specific, the motivation of someone who runs a business compared to a government department. Now, I want to be clear again, I'm not saying that a person who runs a business is guaranteed to be better or worse than a government department. I'm just considering the motivation of each situation. To explain this, let's head straight to the lab. Now I want you to imagine a business owner is running their own fishies shop. Everyone loves fish. Now, by starting this business, the owner has taken on a fair amount of risk. They had to use their savings or through a bank loan to pay for the shop itself, either through rent or by buying it. There's advertising, you need freezers, registers and displays to keep the fish fresh, and you need workers, and you need to buy the products you are selling. As a business owner, you are going to want to sell as many fishies as you can to your customers and hope they come back and buy more later. So you are going to be motivated to provide quality fishes at a price that customers are willing to pay for. But what if as a business owner you are not motivated to work hard or are only motivated by money? What if in an attempt to maximize profit, you keep the same prices, but instead of selling top quality stock, you are selling the more abundant, poor tasting fish? You don't pay your workers well, so they aren't enjoying their work and may not be motivated to give good customer service, or your equipment is secondhand, looks unappealing, or breaks down. Then it's likely the fishy shop will not get returning customers. No customers, no income, then no business, no matter how bad you want it. It may seem harsh when we think of failed businesses as being a good thing, but it is a reflection of what people want to spend their hard-earned money on. And if the customer doesn't like the product the business is selling, then the business fails. But not all hope is lost. You are able to adjust what they are doing to improve their customer satisfaction and get their business back on track. A business owner should be constantly thinking about how to improve, which creates a win-win scenario for both the customers and the business by improving quality of stock, updating broken equipment to help with efficiency, and improving the well-being of their staff at a cost that allows the business to still remain profitable. It won't be easy, but the growing business will then create work for more people, so the customer is able to get what they want and keeps the customer happy. I want to look at another scenario now where a business is government run and how the motivations could be different. And for the purpose of this example, let's say the government run shop is the same fishy store that you started as a business owner. Where does the government get the money to purchase and run everything they need for the shop? Through taxes. So what are the risks to the government of opening this business? Well, the risk is different to a private business owner, and this comes back to motivation. A government would fund its fishy shop business by taxing its citizens and businesses, introducing a tariff on foreign exchange products, or if the government runs a budget deficit which will increase its national debt. Similarly to private businesses, how well the government fishy business operates depends on its motivation. So what is a government motivated by? It's very complicated to answer. Different countries have different motivations. So all I can say is if you want to know what a government is motivated by, each individual should just observe what their particular government is doing with taxpayer funds. Generally speaking, a government would be motivated to gain the support of the people of the nation, whether it's by force or fair vote of the people, is dependent of the country itself, as long as they keep their promises. But back to the example of the government fishy shop business. Because the fishy shop uses tax money, it can use that money to purchase and fund anything it needs for the store. The reality is the low-risk nature of this business doesn't create a motivation of the business to change or to get better. It can continue making the same sales, regardless of whether it's losing or making any money. Keeping in mind, if this government business loses, it needs more money to fill in the gaps, which is taking more money from the nation's people and businesses. And this is where we can really start to see the differences between a government business and a privately owned business. If the government's fishy business starts to make poor business decisions, like the previous example, the risk isn't on the business itself, but it's the taxpayer who needs to have more of their tax money collected to keep the business going or make changes to improve it. The government may choose to stop this program, but it doesn't have to. The business is kept open regardless of its neglect because it's keeping workers employed and is a reason why citizens vote for a certain current government. But there is a more complicated scenario. What if the fishy quality is really high, customer prices are cheap compared to what the business buys them for, the equipment is pristine, and the workers have a really good wage, so everything in the store itself looks great, but the reality of this scenario means that because the costs of the business are so high, it is making significant losses. The income the business receives for selling this fish can't cover the cost of running the business. We have a scenario with which the customer is getting a cheap quality product. The workers at the fishy store are happy, but the trade-off is more individuals and other businesses will be giving more of their money through taxes to fund the loss of the government fishy store business, so they have less money to spend on other things. But I hear you guys. You are probably thinking, hang on there, Kitten. We are talking about how good a business is. The people are getting what they want, and who cares if it's losing money? The Department of Fresh Fish Supply is creating jobs and happy customers. I get it. But remember, a government can't survive without its people. Why? Because the money generated by taxes means individuals are spending less on what they want, or a business is unable to grow to create more jobs. If there were no other businesses than government businesses, then it's very likely that individuals will be forced to participate in a particular job the government deems necessary to generate those products for the country. This would likely create an unhappy worker because they don't have the freedom to choose, or their choice is limited as to what they want to do. But I can hear your other solution blaring through the screen. Tax the rich. Why should all those individuals who have everything hold it for themselves while the less fortunate suffer? They need to pay for their fair share. Let's first look at the facts, which may be difficult to swallow. The reality is, in the United States, those who are of the top 50% of income earners contribute 97% of all tax income. If only it were that simple as taxing the rich. We have to remember what Thomas Sowell teaches. There are no solutions, only trade-offs. Taxing businesses and individuals mean they have less to spend on creating businesses and jobs for others. I want to finish off by clarifying the very broad but crucial differences of a private business compared to a government public business when it comes to the misuse of funds of that business. But let's expand on this a bit. We could break comparisons between the private business and tax-funded government business into topics, with the first topic being efficiency. How well does a business run? When it comes to running a business smoothly, often, more times than not, it's the speed of being able to make decisions which is the key. Back to our fish shop example. Say we have a circumstance where the store freezer has broken down. This will not only cost the business due to the broken equipment itself, but also the stock could spoil that the freezer is storing. The action is critical. The private business has the ability to have staff notify their manager. The manager can quickly make a decision to replace the freezer in a matter of minutes, and the business will have an operational freezer within the next day or so. Now, the lead up to buying the new freezer is the same when it comes to the government fishy business, but the process has a twist. There are regulations that need to be followed in order to get the new freezer. To be clear, a private business may also introduce its own layer of policies to ensure rules are being followed, but it's their choice. A government will generally have rules at every step because they are making decisions that cost the taxpayer. This example is the Department of Fresh Fish Supply purchasing a new freezer. But the thought of it makes me feel utterly exhausted. So I'm going to speed through this. Try and keep up. Instead of the staff member calling their manager to get approval, likely in this instance, a form will have to be filled out by the staff member requesting the new freezer, which will be sent to an administrator who will check that the form has been filled out correctly. If it has, then the request form will be issued over to the store manager, who will approve the request for a new freezer. This form will then be sent over to an administrator in the procurement team, who will check that the freezer meets federal policy requirements, in particular the health and safety standards of the store. Once a model of freezer is decided on, then the order request will go through to the finance department, who will approve it so it can be purchased. Once approved, that request form will then be issued to the purchasing department, who will purchase the new freezer. Okay, let's not do that again. That's just an example of general business operations. And what does the general public think of the business? After all, without the public purchasing the product from the business, there is no business. Based on the public reaction to the business, both businesses will quickly be able to determine if the public likes it or not. But the key is if they don't, how quickly can the business adapt to improve? It's very likely that due to the less amount of regulation that the private business will be able to get to adapt at a much faster rate. The government business, depending on the policy put in place, may have to wait until a new voting cycle, which at that point may cost the taxpayers a lot. So when it comes to efficiency, the clear winner here is the private business. The fact that they don't require as many checks and balances puts it at an advantage when it comes to efficiency. If customers aren't buying a particular product, a private business has the ability to see this immediately and make changes, whereas a government department must go through a series of approval processes which delays such change. Motivation is also a key factor for a private business because it has a much higher risk of failure. Remember, if a government department loses money, it has access to additional funds if needed from the taxpayer. If losses occur with a private business resulting in eventual failure, this not only affects the business owner, but also the owner's immediate family. A private business will more likely be motivated to ensure efficiency because the risk of failure has a much greater personal toll. This takes us to our next topic of cost. Thankfully, this is much easier to explain. Private business wins here. Enough said. Okay, I'll explain. Regulation costs a lot of money. Each step of the process costs money. The faster a good decision can be made, the less it costs. The government is at a disadvantage because of the number of steps that regulation creates. Each person in that process comes at a cost. So the more cost, which either through a more expensive product or larger national debt or more taxes, sometimes maybe even all at once. Remember too that a government needs you for funding, whereas a private business takes on its own risk, either using their own funds or a loan through a commercial bank. We spoke earlier about motivation, and that's another reason why private business will always have an edge over a government business. At the end of the day, that reduces costs. So again, private businesses are much more cost effective. The next category is social impacts, to which I have another clear response. No comment. I'm a cat. I'm not a person. I don't get social issues. I got my own problems. I will say this though, there is a cost at any social program. It all costs money, which at the end of the day is funded solely on the back of taxes. So again, you are paying. I think it's no surprise each social program will have its own set of regulations, similar to what we have already gone through. Some may make the argument that without regulation, huge companies would just buy out smaller ones and become a gigantic world-controlling business that has power over everything. Maybe, but this is very unlikely to occur naturally. In fact, a large business taking over the smaller ones may have the opposite effect. As the giant business grows, if it doesn't satisfy the needs of its customers by providing a quality product at a reasonable price, customers will move to another small business that can provide the cheaper and higher quality product. The new smaller business wins. If they can afford the costs of required government introduced policies and regulations, which 9 times out of 10 they can't afford it. Something else to think about too when it comes to social programs that reveals an invisible cost that we all pay for. Here's an example, and we'll use fish. Now the brown fish and the yellowfin fish market is normal at the moment with consistent supply and demand, which means prices for the fish are stable and the fishermen can catch these fish and have a sustainable business. Say the government recognises that this brown fish has a fan club and they protest for its protection. The government then decides to ban brown fish from being caught and sold. The brownfish fishermen now have no work, so they move into catching yellowfin fish. Now, because demand for fish as a whole hasn't dropped, we need more yellowfin fish to cover the demand that brown fish used to have. This causes the price of yellowfin fish to go up because it's in higher demand. And because there is only so many fishermen that can catch the fish, the supply stays the same. We then have another group who are protesting the rising cost of yellowfin fish and want the price to come down. The government then decides to fix the cost of yellowfin fish so the price stays low for the public to afford. This then means the yellowfin fish fishermen catching the fish can't afford to run their business because what the yellowfin fish is now being sold at won't cover the costs to catch the fish and pay their workers. This will make it difficult for the fishermen to run a profitable business moving forward. If the fishermen can't run a profitable business, then they will shut and there will be no supply. If the government wants to step in and attempt to resolve this, it will result in the following possible actions. Option 1. The government pays the losses the fishermen businesses have incurred from the brown fish ban and the yellowfin fish price fixing. The fishermen are either paid directly through rebates or by offering coupons. This type of funding either uses tax money to pay the fishermen or future earnings through deficit spending. Either way, this means you pay the fishermen the difference. Option 2. The government could reduce spending of one government department to offset the cost to cover the fishermen losses. But something tells me that the government reducing their spending is unlikely. Or option 3, increase taxes to cover the losses of the fishermen. The reality is any form of government intervention will result in an artificial demand towards what they want to stimulate, which will ultimately lead to a combination of higher prices or a lack of supply in that item. Offering coupons as a discount does the same thing. So instead of banning brown fish, the government creates a subsidy to encourage people to buy yellowfin fish rather than brown fish. This will mean that the demand for yellowfin fish will skyrocket because there is only so much that can be caught, causing supply to not keep up with the demand. The demand for brown fish did drop because that didn't have the subsidy. Also, it caused the price of the brown fish to move lower while the yellowfin fish went higher. In a very short space of time, the value of the subsidy has been seen to make fish as a whole more expensive. On top of that, the skyrocketing yellowfin fish price has caused an increased demand for brown fish, even though the intention was to conserve it. Not to drag this out too long, each of us as individuals can determine the importance of government getting involved in social issues. If governments were solely responsible for the protection of its citizens and upholding the law, its society was left to produce materials and provide services, each person would pay far less tax, whether it's directly through income tax or indirectly through inflation. When disaster strikes, we would hope that society would come together to support one another, and as long as laws of the land don't disadvantage certain members of society, it is possible that with individuals charged less tax and subject to prices not going up, wouldn't they be happier if they have more to spend? Businesses are also taxed less, so they can provide cheaper goods and services, and if they don't, the market chooses to spend with a business who does. So how about we just tax other countries instead? That could have its own problems. As an example, if the Australian government decided to introduce a tax on oil, then the cost of diesel for the Australian fishing company would go up, meaning that the cost of catching fish goes up, and ultimately the price of my canned fishies goes up to allow for this new tax. So if this happened in multiple countries, then the effects on pricing would be greater. And if Australia has a canned tuna industry, customers both locally and internationally may choose to buy elsewhere because they can get the same or a similar product cheaper as a whole because they don't have a tax which raises the costs. Ultimately, the influence of government in the business sector raises the cost of living for its citizen in every circumstance. Without government, there would be society. Without law, that would be absolute chaos. However, need to remember that the government needs you to operate anything that they do, and that citizens need government to serve and protect them. It is essential to understand the most effective ways of producing products, because taxes have a huge negative influence to the standard of living of the majority if taxes are excessive and wasteful. But you don't have to listen to me. Just make sure you reason on all the points of view. When it comes to a new tax being introduced, don't worry about what is said or what is being written about it. Look to see what is actually happening and what the true effects may be. Keep cool, stay humble, and be kind to all, even when behind closed doors.